Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Everett Jewish Life Center at Chautauqua. I'm Bob Schloss, one of the volunteer members of the program committee, and we're delighted that you're joining us today. The Everett Jewish Life Center is the Jewish house on the Chautauqua campus at which we consider every aspect connected in any way with being Jewish, from food to comedy, to history, to politics, to music. We are not trying to isolate ourselves from controversial topics in current events, such as the rise of anti-Semitism. We want to engage world-class experts and our community in facing the issues before us in the world. So that makes us a very important part of Chautauqua, and we welcome anybody. Tell your friends, they don't have to be Jewish, to come to the fabulous talks and films that we have at the Everett Center. This is the 16th year this center has existed. Can I just see a show of hands? I know I can't see outside, but wave your hands hard if it's the first time you've ever been here. Okay, inside we have 4 people. So I'll just say, longtime Chautauquans, Henry and Edith Everett, and many other longtime Chautauquans, including Rich Moschel and many others, were thinking maybe we should have a Jewish denominational house at Chautauqua. And those discussions were going on when, unfortunately, Henry Everett, an extraordinary person, passed away. And Edith Everett and her family said, you know, the appropriate memorial for him would be for us to give the money and assist in designing a fabulous place where we could have rooms that people could stay and we could have programs. And thanks to their generosity, this place exists. And now a whole lot of volunteers keep it going. So I do want to say we're proud that we are a vital part of Chautauqua. The institution is not in a position to support us in any way. So all our ongoing expenses, we pay for. So I just invite you to join me and my wife. If you like to donate with a check, you can do that. If you like to donate online, you don't have to, but very appreciated. There is still a week and a half of Chautauqua to go. We have booklets outside that show the programs we're going to have, but the general outline is that our speakers give talks on Monday at 3:30, this one, and then lunch talks at 12:30 on Tuesday. We also show films on Wednesday at 3:30 and Sunday at 3:30. So I guess what I want to do is get ready to introduce our speaker, but first ask people, especially if you're sitting here in this room, to double check that your electronic devices won't ring or beep. So don't remember it, look at it. So with that, I want to tell you a little bit about our amazing speaker. Today we have Dr. Susan M. Kahn. She is the Associate Director of the Julis Rabinowitz Program on Jewish and Israeli Law at Harvard Law School. She was trained as an anthropologist, and she has published in social sciences, animal studies, Jewish studies, and her book called Reproducing Jews, A Cultural Account of Assisted Conception in Israel, which came out in 2000, has won a National Jewish Book Award. Not easy to do. It also won the Eileen Basker Prize for Outstanding Research in Gender and Health from the American Anthropological Association. Today, we're going to hear her talk about her latest book called Canine Pioneer, The Extraordinary Life of Rudolfina Menzel, which was published by Brandeis University Press in 2022. Dr. Kahn, please welcome to Everett. We're so glad you came to talk to us.
Thank you so much. It's really a total delight to be here. I've never been to Chautauqua. I've been here for about 24 hours, and I can see why you all love it so much. It's really it's a very, very special place, and I'm very grateful to my hosts for being so gracious and so hospitable, and I'm delighted to be here. So I work at Harvard Law School. I want to make it clear, I am not a lawyer. I'm an anthropologist. If you want to talk about Harvard Law School, I'm happy to do that. But I run an academic program at the law school, and that puts me sort of in a different category. I can't really answer questions about the First Amendment or constitutional law. In any case, I'm also, as Bob just said, I'm an anthropologist by training, so this project that I started at the beginning of COVID, this book, Canine Pioneer, was a departure for me also, because I became a biographer. And my goal for this talk today is, if you leave this room and you find Rudolfina Menzel even an eighth as interesting as I do, it will be a win. So I discovered this person. Because we don't have too much time, I'm very happy to answer any and all questions about how I came to this project, about my methods, about my sources, about my archival work, about translation, all the kind of nuts and bolts. Very happy to answer all those questions. But I think I'd like to just dive right into the topic and into her story, and hope that it sparks or illuminates, sparks a little interest for you and illuminates a corner of history that you may not have known anything about. So Rudolfina Menzel, who was born Rudolfina Walthoch in Vienna in 1891, came of age in a world that I imagine many of you are familiar with. She was a bourgeois. She was born into a bourgeois cosmopolitan family. She actually lived down the street from Freud in that very, elite part of Vienna. I have this thing. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her background, and I should say in today's talk, I'm really going to focus on her career as a scientist, which she was an internationally known scientist in the interwar period, and soon you'll find out why. And tomorrow I'm going to focus more on her career as a Zionist. And as a Zionist, for those of you who are interested in the history of Zionism, she really was a combination of Chaim Weizmann and Henrietta Zold, which means nothing to anybody who doesn't know anything about the history of Zionism. But if you know something about it, she was really quite a remarkable and extraordinarily unheralded figure. Okay, let's jump right into it. So her dates are 1891, born in Vienna, and she was born, as I said, into a bourgeois cosmopolitan family. That's her in the center there, looking very mischievous, I think. This was the Ringstrasse neighborhood, for any of you who've been to Vienna. Was the intellectual world of, as I said, she was brought up down the street from Freud, the same world as Wittgenstein, Mahler, etc. Her parents attended the opera, went to music performances, sort of like Viennese Chautauqua, I guess. And this was the very, very privileged world in which she came of age. She was an unusual girl. And I'm pointing out this particular picture because any of you who've had a teenage daughter recognize this expression. She was very truculent, very strident, very precocious, and very willful. And despite the fact that she had been born into this quite illustrious family, she became a very devoted socialist at a very young age. As a teenager, she actually went to a socialist school. And because she had these kind of extraordinary qualities of heart and mind, and she was quite a good orator, even as a young girl. She was groomed from a very early age. She knew all the leading socialists in the Viennese Socialist Party. She was groomed for a leadership position as a leader in the Austrian Social Democratic Party, which she decided not to do for reasons that you'll have to tune in tomorrow to find out. There was a lot of ideological tension for her between her Zionism and her socialism, and she ultimately chose her Zionism over her socialism. But that's a different story. It's an interesting story. So she comes of age in this family. You can see what kind of character we're dealing with here. And she enrolls at the University of Vienna in the Faculty of Natural Sciences, which actually was the same department the same faculty that Freud did his PhD in. She enrolls in 1909. I included this picture, even though we're talking about her science career today, because this is a picture of Rudolfina circled there. Oops, sorry. Circled here, as you can see. She is the only female member at the University of Vienna's Theodor Herzl College Club. This was the Zionist Association at the University of Vienna. It was an all-male association. She argued her way in, and it was a very fortuitous. I think the picture is just quite striking, but it was a fortuitous charge on her part, because it was in the Theodor Herzl Club that she. Getting used to this thing. It was in the Theodor Herzl Club that she met her husband, who, yes, his name was Rudolf, and her name was Rudolfina. So they met and they fell in love in the Theodor Herzl College Club, and here's a picture of them on the eve of World War I. Rudolf was studying to be a doctor. He went and served for the Austrian army as a medic. And she, with her newly minted PhD in chemistry, ran a large chemical factory outside of Vienna. Already, you can see that despite the fact that she was barely 5 feet tall, she had a commanding presence, she was recognized for her intelligence, and she was put in charge of this large chemical factory during the war. Now, this is just the background part. We're about to get into her interesting career. After the war, Rudolf had been stationed in Linz, home of the Linzer Torts, where Hitler was brought up. It's a provincial city in northern Austria, not far from Vienna. And he was stationed there, and he decided to stay. And so the Menzels decided to stay in Linz, a relatively provincial town. And it was in Linz that Rudolfina was given her first boxer dog. And this is where the story gets, where her real career begins to take off. So this is the early 1920s. It's actually 1921, shortly after the war. She's given this boxer dog. For any of you who know something about dogs, you'll see that this is a large, this boxer doesn't look like boxers do today. It's a large Mastiff-like dog, extremely powerful, strong, working dog. That had been bred only for the last 20 or 30 years by German-speaking breeders to perform certain service functions in this context. So Rudolfina adopts this dog, she falls in love with it. Many of us have dogs, many of us fall in love with our dogs. Very few of us decide to become world-changing scientific researchers into the behavior, breeding, training, and chemical qualities and learn about the chemical abilities of the dog's sense of smell. And that's exactly what Rudolfina set out to do. She became fascinated by Mowgli. She started to develop a whole series of friends who were breeding and training dogs in Austria at this time, which I'll tell you a little bit more about. She became very interested, as I said, in the canine sense of smell. She became interested in the evolution of domestic dogs, in canine cognition and service dog training, and all of the different aspects. It was kind of this really exciting time of thinking about dogs in new modern ways after World War I. And if you'll, some of you may be familiar with Pavlov's famous experiments to study dogs in Russian laboratories and get them to respond to bells and to clickers, etc. Rudolphina wasn't interested in that kind of experimental laboratory research. She was interested in studying dogs in their natural habitat, which means in their relationships with people, and in developing those kinds of creating different kinds of scientific studies in order to learn how dogs learn, think, and behave. Now, as I mentioned, this was a time of burgeoning interest in Central Europe in learning how to train dogs to perform tasks, to participate in urban industrialized societies, and to actually participate in sort of nation building and colonizing projects more broadly. The British were using dogs in South Africa. Germans were using dogs in parts of their German colonies in Africa. And there was a lot of interest in thinking about dogs, not just as they had traditionally been used, as shepherds or sled dogs or guard dogs, but beginning to think about them as citizens of a modern society. What roles can they play? How can they be police dogs, guard dogs, patrol dogs, etc.? And this involved a whole set of new scientific questions that were burgeoning in the world of psychology, human psychology. And Rudolphina was one of the first people to kind of think about how all of that work that psychologists were doing amongst humans could be transposed onto dogs. What do I mean by that? So, for example, after World War I, you had all these soldiers who were coming out of the war. They had shell shock. They were had been cognitively impaired by their service. And it was at this time that they developed a kind of personality test to try and understand what sort of roles veterans could serve after the war. So Rudolphina saw this burgeoning field of interest in human psychology, the origins of behavior, the mutability of behavior, and she decided to transpose that onto dogs. And I'll explain this for any of you who've gotten a dog or who've adopted a dog in a rescue shelter. You'll see that what they do with the dog is they perform a temperament test. And they see if the dog guards its resources, and they see if the dog is protective of its, of other dogs and its other puppies or other dogs in its literature, in its environment. And learning how to understand the temperament or the personality of a dog, which is something that today is completely ubiquitous and widespread, was Rudolphina's invention. She was the person who developed the first ever canine temperament test, and that required a kind of immersion in the psychological literature and an ability to transpose it into the world of animal behavior. And, I emphasize that, and I hope this comes through. I went into it quite a degree of detail in the book. To be a chemist, to run a large laboratory, to be a scientist is one thing. But to pivot and to be able to transpose your scientific understanding of how to conduct experiments, how to run a lab, how to control your research subjects, et cetera, to transpose that into a completely different area of inquiry requires quite a flexible, imaginative, and creative mind. And that's the kind of mind that she had. Really quite remarkable. So she got this dog. She became very, this is another picture of her and Mowgli. She became infatuated with her personal dog, Mowgli, obviously named after the character in the Rudyard Kipling book. And I should add that she had dozens of Boxers throughout her life. And after Mowgli, she named them all after arias. She had, I think, Rigoletto and, every other aria. She was a great opera lover. But this was Mowgli, and I include this here because you still see her as a young woman, and this infatuation is developing. So the kind of scientist that she became, I don't know if anybody is familiar with the field of kynology, which is a scientific field. It's the scientific study of the domestic dog. And a kynologist is one who studies domestic dogs. It's still a term that's very popular in Europe. It's not so popular here. There is a burgeoning field of research that's actually really taken off in the last 20 years with genetic studies around dogs and dog behavior. Here they're called dog behaviorists. Some of you may be familiar with, you can't look at the New York Times bestseller list without seeing books about canine psychology. But the original name of the field, the scientific name for the field, is kynology. And Rudolphina quickly transformed herself into one of the leading kynologists of interwar Europe. Now, in order to do this, she had to build a laboratory. And in order to build a laboratory to study domestic dogs, you need to build a kennel. And because she and Rudolph had such an extraordinary relationship, and he was one of her, if you're going to be a brilliant woman, you really need to have a partner like Rudolph, because he was her first and last champion always, an enormous supporter both emotionally, psychologically, intellectually, and financially of her work. And as soon as Rudolphina decided that she wanted to become a kynologist and build a laboratory to study dogs, he built her a kennel. This is a picture of the interior of their home in Linz. And I include this picture because you see in the center there, this couple, these are Rudolph's parents, and they're exchanging a dubious glance at each other, asking themselves, what has Rudolph gotten himself involved with here? Here you see Rudolphina with her characteristically determined look, Rudolph over here, and here are two of their domestic boxer dogs. This just gives you a sense of their home. And now their home became an international meeting place for scientists from all over the world who would make the pilgrimage to their provincial little house. I'll put up this picture. This is Rudolph and Rudolphina standing in front of their kennels, which housed up to 60 dogs at a time. Now, sorry about that. You can see three of their quite ferocious-looking boxers here in the front. Now, when I say that she started a laboratory, this is about 1923. She designed an extraordinarily ambitious longitudinal research study in which she set out to weigh, measure, and observe what turned out to be over 1,000 boxer puppies bred over 16 successive generations, to weigh, measure, and observe them every single day, and to collect all of that data in order to understand the difference between inherited and acquired traits. Now, this is it's still a fundamental issue. It's the nature-nurture debate, and she became fascinated with that, and she wanted to produce data to try and understand what accounts for the differences in individuals who are descended from a known population, and how do their individual qualities develop. Are they the product of inherited differences? Are they the product of environmental changes? And she, there were obvious morphological differences between each individual puppy, but of over 1,000 puppies that she ultimately bred. But she was very interested in trying to understand what caused those not the morphological differences so much, but what caused the personality differences. How could she account for those? And it was in this kennel that she started doing this work. Obviously, she had many canine helpers, kennel helpers that had to help her do this kind of work. And it was in the process of doing this work that she developed the first ever canine temperament test. She also was doing many simultaneous studies. As I said, she was a chemist. She was very interested in the canine sense of smell, the extremely acute canine sense of smell, and she was amongst the first to identify and to kind of prove the qualities that a dog has to identify scents as they change over time. The scent of a person, if you put it in a jar, if you put it on a piece of cloth, for example, for tracking dogs, you take a piece of cloth from the missing person, you put it in a jar, or you somehow isolate it, and she was trying to understand how do the chemical qualities of the scent of a person change over time intervals, and how reliable can the evidence be of a dog, how much can you rely on a dog to locate a person based on a piece of their scented clothing, for example, depending on how long the person has been missing. So she was thinking about all of these kind of real world problems in very logical, scientific ways. And in fact, she came out with an article in 1930, she published an article that is still the foundational article about the canine sense of smell. So she's doing all of these different studies. She's, as you can see, they're a Jewish couple. They live in rural, what was then pretty much rural Austria. Most dog enthusiasts at the time were certainly not Jewish and were certainly not intellectuals from Vienna. They were sort of petty bourgeois kind of, landowners, right? And I like this picture because you see Rudolphina, these are some of her dog friends, her canine compatriots, as I call them. You see her, she stands out here, is this little person. This was a meeting, actually, she organized the first ever, this was the first ever Gynecological Association meeting in Linz to really focus on the canine sense of smell. Very, very exciting and famous at the time. And it's where she announced this groundbreaking research that she had done on the canine sense of smell. And really the thing to take away from it is nobody really understood that each individual has their own individual scent. And Rudolphina was the first person to prove that individual people have their own individual scent that can be tracked. And that's an important piece of information if you put yourself in the mind of a Austrian policeman in the 1920s and you're trying to track down criminals who have stolen things. If you have this new tool, which is canine olfaction, the canine ability to detect a criminal, it's a new tool in your tool belt. And the canine corps of the Austrian police and military and the German police and military quickly became very interested in Rudolphina's work and very interested in Rudolphina herself. And it wasn't long before, throughout the 1920s, she traveled all over Europe giving talks to policemen and army officers about how to train dogs, how to breed outstanding police dogs, and how to train outstanding police dogs using her really novel methods. So she was quite an unusual figure at the time. She publishes dozens of articles. These are all her scientific articles. You'll see the headlines are in Hebrew because I copied these out of what was ultimately a Hebrew language companion of her work, but all of the articles themselves are in fact in German. That was her, that was in fact her, the language that she wrote in. Some more of her articles. This is a picture that appeared in the Linz Daily Post in 1933 of one of her prize boxers from her kennel. Her kennel, for those of you who know any Hebrew, she called her kennel Bnei Satan, which in Hebrew means children of the devil, which is a very good name for a police dog kennel. And this is just an indication that she was, of the way that she was sort of known and in this quirky, strange world. Now, I also include this here because this comes out in 1933. Obviously, the Nazis had come to power in Berlin. And she had, in fact, she was a very frequent visitor to Weimar, Berlin. She did train all the dogs for the Weimar army. They were all trained according to her methods, using her temperament tests, bred according to her methods, etc. And in fact, these were the dogs that, that became Nazi dogs. Clearly, this was not part of a plan that she had or any part of her intention. And in fact, she wrote later in her life about how beyond dismayed she was that she had, about the role that she had played in building up obviously the canine forces of the Nazis. Now, you know, well, let me just go ahead for one moment. So these dogs, you can see this is a form of military technology, right? This, in this, I include this picture also because this is German Shepherd wearing a big muzzle being walked down the street by 2 Nazi officers. And this dog is not a companion dog. This is not a pet dog. This is a form of military technology that is designed to pursue, attack, control, and otherwise terrorize general populations of people, which is exactly, in fact, how dogs were used by the Third Reich. So I want to make a very clear division here between a pet dog and a dog as a form of military technology, a real service dog. And I'll talk about that more in a minute also. So it's the early 1930s. She's continuing to do her work. She's still weighing, measuring, observing all these puppies. She's participating in the scientific community of dog researchers at the time. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow, that picture. And this is the cover of the magazine that went. I'm surprised. I'd be surprised if anybody had ever heard of this. You know, you've all heard of the 1936 Olympics that were held in Nazi Germany. This was held a year before, in 1935. It was the International Canine Convention, the Third International Kynological Congress that was held in Frankfurt in 1935 as part of, it was designed to showcase, like the Olympics were the year after, showcase German greatness. Over 60,000 people attended this Congress. 3,300 dogs were shown. It was a dog show, it was a scientific conference, and unsurprisingly, Hitler's dog won first place. And it also was an opportunity. Rudolf and Rudolfina attended the conference. They were part of the Austrian delegation. This is a picture of the scientific meetings that were going on in conjunction with the dog show at the time. And this was an opportunity for Rudolf. I don't think women were allowed to present scientific research because Rudolf was the one who got up in this forum and presented the findings to date of Rudolfina's pioneering study on inheritance, on the heritability of traits. And he got up in front of this crowd of Nazis and declared that there's no such thing as race. Now, the entire point, you know, dog breeding and eugenics have a lot of overlaps, right? They're basically about orchestrating reproductive pairings in order to determine desired outcomes. So the Nazis were interested in all kinds of animal breeding, but because dog breeding was so accessible and dogs were so ubiquitous, they were particularly interested in dog breeding. So for Rudolf to get up, and he made a very credible claim that based on Rudolfina's research, and I'm showing you a slide. This is the slide that he showed at that Congress based on her research, which is the outcome of her study to that date until 1935. She actually finished the study in 1937. Rudolf proclaimed that each dog possesses a unique mosaic of genetic traits, that there is no such thing as a race of traits that can be passed on or pre-selected. And needless to say, this was the end of Rudolfina's publishing career in Germany. But I highlight it because it also gives you a sense of the courageousness of this couple, right, to get up and to present this work in that kind of a forum. I want to leave time for questions. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because tomorrow I'm going to talk about the years between 1938 and 1948. 1938, the Menzels had to flee Austria. The Austrian government The emerging Austrian government declared that the Jewish kennel had to be shut. Their passports were confiscated. They, in fact, escaped on forged papers on a train. It was very dramatic. And they managed to get to Palestine in 1938. Whoops. And I'll just show you this picture. This is Rudolphina in Haifa, actually, in Palestine in 1938. And I'm going to save this part of the lecture till tomorrow, which is between 1938 and 1948, where she invented and built up the entire canine infrastructure in Palestine before the 1948 war. This is a period in history that nobody had ever examined or looked at. You know, it's a remarkable, first of all, you can see she's, again, she has such an interesting face, but she's standing here with 3 different kinds of dogs, a cat on her shoulder, and I don't know if you can read it here in the background, but she got there and she put up a sign outside of her house. The Jewish agency gave her a house because she was a respected scientist. She put up a sign that said the Palestine Research Institute for Canine Psychology and Training. She just established it. She continued with her studies on the heritability of genetic traits, and she actually launched an entirely new study on the processes of domestication, which I can talk about in a moment. She was particularly interested, she was indefatigable, in other words. She was particularly interested in this type of dog that she discovered in Palestine. And this is what is now known as a Canaan dog, and I'll tell you a little bit more about them. She's thrown into this she's 47 years old at this point. You know, she's lost her home. She's completely displaced. She and Rudolph had absolutely no money. But she wasn't going to let this stop her. She launched she kind of pivoted and created an entirely new scientific set of studies on the processes of domestication, as I mentioned, really based on this type of dog. Now, this type of dog at the time was known as a pariah dog. Now they're called village dogs in the literature amongst animal behaviorists. And these are the dogs that have been accompanying human beings on around their encampments for the last 40,000 years. And if you go anywhere in the developing world, you can see stray feral dogs that are climatically adapted to whatever ecological niche they happen to be living in. And this type of dog is with this size and these kind of ears and that kind of coat is the dog that was running around in Palestine. And in fact, if you go to the Negev Desert today, you'll see this kind of dog. And I should add, not that we need to get into politics, but a number of these dogs have been, there's certainly many other things to talk about, but have been displaced from Gaza in the current conflict and are coming across the border from Gaza into Israel. And there's a big question about thousands and thousands of dogs have been coming out of Gaza, and the question is what to do with those dogs, in addition to many other questions, obviously. So, but this part of her, I want you to just look at this, look at this dog and just keep it in your head for a second, because I'm going to talk about that dog more as it relates to Rudolphina's scientific career. I just want to draw your attention to 2 other things in the picture. This dog is a Saluki, which is also a native dog to Palestine. This is the the famous Arab hunting hound. Arabs and Muslims all across the Muslim world have been writing poetry to this hunting hound since the 13th century, because this was a dog that they used to do coursing for gazelles and hares and other kinds of hunting. So, you know, you've heard about, perhaps you know about hunting with falcons and hunting with horses and sort of the grand noble tradition of the Bedouin hunter. Well, that tradition was maintained at this time and sustained today. And these dogs, which look markedly different than this kind of dog, they're bred much more deliberately than these dogs, which are really just the product of natural selection. They're just left to breed on their own. These dogs have been carefully bred for centuries in order to have outstanding traits as hunters. So there's that kind of dog. And then you see one of her gigantic boxers here. She and Rudolph did manage to flee Linz with 2 boxers, a male and a female pair, in order to seed a new generation of boxer patrol dogs that contributed to the state-building project of the Jewish settlement in Palestine at the time, and that's what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. Boxers, however, you can, the thing I like about this picture is boxers, as you can see, these are three very different types of dog. And boxers did not fare very well in the hot Middle Eastern climate. They just would lay around all day, and she had to figure out what to do about how to develop techniques to breed boxers and other kind of European breeds so that they would be able to survive this sort of climate. Okay, what time do we have? 4:10. Okay, just a few more minutes and I'll open it to questions. So I'm going to go quick. These are the slides for tomorrow. These are the 1938 to 1948 slides. But I wanted to go to this picture. So after the war, Rudolfina is now 58 years old. It's in the late 40s. And she decides to remake herself again. And she decided to tackle the problem of guide dog training. Now, this was a method of training that had emerged also in the interwar period in Europe. There was a very big Swiss guide dog training school that she was in correspondence with in the 30s, but she had never tackled the problem herself. And if you think like a dog trainer, or you think about dog training, you think that training dogs for the blind presents a whole new series of problems and conundrums because you have to train a dog to disobey its owner, right? You have to train a dog not to do what the owner is telling them, what their handler is telling them to do, and to use their own senses in order to, circumnavigate obstacles or dangers or other kinds of things. So Rudolfina just happily immerses herself in all these new sets of problems and decides to create the Palestine Seeing Eye Dog Institute, which she opened in 1951 in just outside of Haifa. She recruited trainers. She managed to collect dogs. Dogs who are trained to be guide dogs have to have very specific kinds of temperaments. And she also managed to convince blind people, of whom there were many in Palestine and Israel at the time. This state had been established in 1948. There were many blind Israelis, both Jews and Arabs at the time. She was adamant that her guide dog institute be open to both Jews and Arabs. She did not want to discriminate in that way, in any way. And if you think about it, you think about traditional Jewish society, particularly Eastern European Jewish society, Middle Eastern Jewish society, and traditional Arab society, not big dog lovers. And in order to learn how to benefit to get the benefits, the independence and the other sorts of benefits that come along with having a guide dog, blind Israelis had to first be taught how to get over their cultural and innate fear of living with dogs. So she had a whole program for that as well, which engaged a different set of psychological problems and questions. The reason I show you this picture is that some of you may have already recognized, who is this figure in the middle? It's Helen Keller. She persuaded Helen Keller to come to Palestine in the early 1950s and give the inaugural address at her Palestine Seeing Guide Dog school. I will speed forward in the rest of her life, and then I'll stop. And I hope you'll have some questions. What did she do with the next 23 years of her life? Well, she became a professor of animal psychology at Tel Aviv University. She finally got the kind of institutional prestige that she had long desired and really deserved. She established Israel's national breed, the Kahn dog, which is now an AKC registered breed. She helped establish kennels. If you watch the Westminster Dog Show, you'll see the Kahn dog participating. This is just the natural breed of Palestine. This is that stray, feral village dog of Palestine. She wrote a standard for the breed. She called it the Kahn dog. She invented this national breed for Israel, and she wanted it to be an ambassador for Israel in the world of canine sports, because that was the world that she lived in. Service dogs in Israel have since evolved to play very, very important roles in Israeli society. The Guide Dog Institute that she founded, although it was disbanded and then refounded, is one of the leading guide dog institutes in the world that's constantly pioneering new techniques and training methods. Some of you may know about the Israeli Army's Canine Corps, OKETS, which is also, I was there last year, they invite visitors from Army officers from all over the world to learn about their particular techniques. So Rudolphina left quite a profound legacy in terms of particularly service dog training, let alone therapy dogs, et cetera, which is also very, very much a burgeoning field in Israel. And I'll leave you with this particular image. Now, this image was drawn by one of Rudolphina's friends that she met in the Theodor Herzl College Club to bring you back to Vienna in 1912. And this was how she was perceived. So she was quite, as I said, a formidable character. This was something she herself saved, right? So I'm putting that up there just so that you can think about what kind of a person would save this sort of drawing of themselves. Okay, thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Wow, that's awesome. So the first thing I want to say is that the bookstore plans to come over here with some copies of your books. And so we set up a table. If you want, you have a dog lover or a young woman scientist or a trainer, and you'd like to bring this book home, will you be willing to sign at the end? Okay, so we have a microphone. Do you want to take it to people, or do you want them to stand up? If you're able to stand up at the mic, it means the people in the library downstairs and outside can hear you. If you are outside or in the library and you want to come and speak at the mic, and let's hear what's on your mind. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sure.
Okay, I'm as short as she is.
Okay. Interested in the fact that her research was all about boxers. Mm-hmm.
And then when you see her with the Nazis in Germany, suddenly, thinking we're German shepherds.
Right.
Did she believe that her research extended outside of the boxer breed?
Yeah, that's a great question. The techniques that she pioneered were then used by Doberman Pinscher breeders, German Shepherd breeders, all form of, the Germans were very into breeding big, strong military dogs. And her techniques could be used on any discrete population or breed of dogs. They didn't have to be boxers.
Yeah, I don't think that today that we think that there aren't major differences between different breeds. So that's why I'm just curious about that.
So, that's the core of the problem, isn't it? Dogs have different morphological distinctions, right? And they're breed standards that different breeds have to conform to. Doberman Pinschers have to have certain kind of ears that stand up. Boxers have to have certain kind of ears that go down, certain kind of body types, certain kinds of coloring, all the obvious kind of cosmetic shapes and styles that they need to conform to. But there also are personality types that can be generalized across breeds generally, not to the individual, not on the individual basis, but on a general basis. So, you'll see, for example, the most popular breed of canine soldier in canine army corps is the Belgian Malinois, which is a very slender, intelligent kind. It's a very slender form of a junior German Shepherd, has the same kind of, looks like a German Shepherd, but very slender. They're very fast, very agile, and highly intelligent, kind of like a border collie, right? When you have a big litter of Belgian Malinois, say you have 8 Belgian Malinois puppies, what people do now is they use a version of Rudolphina Menzel's canine temperament test to determine which of those dogs, and some of you may know that how they do this with guide dogs, right? Is they select the dogs of a litter that seem to exhibit the most ideal personality traits, the most ideal personality traits for that kind of a breed. And then those dogs go through an extended selection process in order to be the dog who ultimately, you know, these individual service dogs, people invest up to $50,000 to $60,000 worth of resources in training, equipment, veterinary care, et cetera, to create those kinds of really exceptional individuals. But, you know, Dobermans have one set of predominant skills, boxers have another set of predominant skills, but individuals, I mean, I will say, I, for example, have a pet French bulldog, which is supposed to just sit on my couch and do nothing, and he loves to fetch. Why this dog loves to fetch, I have no idea. Because dogs, you know, and genes are very weird things, and they do very unexpected things. And that's why, you know, I would say I am not a dog breeder, I'm not a dog trainer, but I would say to those of you who think I've got this crazy dog and all I have to do is train it, you really have a crazy dog and there's not much you can do about it. So.
I was a bit puzzled when these people who spend their lives breeding dogs for a particular purpose, then Rudolph gets up and he tells all the Nazis there's no such thing as a race. So can you clarify that a bit for me? Thanks.
So he was, you know, they were ideologically obviously opposed to the blood and soil theory of the Nazis, right? The sort of seed and soil theory of the Aryan nation. They, you know, Rudolph and Rudolphina, like many intellectuals of their time, recognized how dangerous these ideas were. And she was very careful to distinguish between what's something that may be scientifically compelling, and she in fact believed, as a dog breeder and as a eugenicist, she believed that you could bring out certain traits in a, not in a replicatory way, right? These are not machines that are being, you know, copied. They're not clones, right? But you can breed in order to create certain, to have certain advantages. But at the same time, she thought that that way of thinking, an agricultural model for thinking about animal breeding, had to be separated by a gigantic wall between humans and politics. Right? So she said there may be groups of people who, I mean, she didn't say this, but, you know, the implication was there may be groups of people who share certain morphological characteristics, but that does not mean that they belong to a race. And the Germans were trying to establish, obviously, the Nazis were trying to establish this hierarchy of races and to categorize individuals based on the way that they looked into certain races. And that was a great project of my discipline of anthropologist as well, was measuring skulls and features, et cetera, trying to categorize people into races. You know, one thing that we have learned, and it's interesting actually, the first dog to have its genome completely mapped was in fact a boxer 20 years ago. It was a boxer dog. And you know, some of you may have, or you know people who have sent away to have their mutt's dog's DNA deciphered. There is no difference in dog DNA. Like, the dogs are all the same. And you're just being taken for a ride with the dog DNA test. And that was really the kind of, that was the message that Rudolph and Rudolphina were trying to impart, that there may be an agricultural and a scientific reason to try and produce certain traits within a population based on breeding, but that doesn't mean that there's such a thing as a race, and it means that you always have individual variation, no matter what you try and engineer, and that if there is such individual variation, it is part and parcel, it proves that there's no such thing as a race, right? That is replicated, and that these traits are replicated on and on.
If there's no other questions, if you would allow Dr. Kahn to go to the front where you can sign books for people.
Absolutely. And yeah, thank you so much.
Please come back tomorrow at 12:30 when we'll hear about Rodolfina Menzel and her colleagues' work in the first 30 years of the State of Israel, building an infrastructure to support dogs and other pets.